And with that, we can start the recording. So, hello everyone again. Welcome to our panel on hydrogen governance and on democracy. In the next 10 minutes, we will delve deeper into questions of governance and democracy vis-à-vis the hydrogen expansion. That's an important focus because large-scale energy infrastructures are so complex socio-technical systems. They have an impact on society. Society needs to actively have a say what kind of hydrogen future is envisaged, and also how decarbonization of highly industrialized economies can actually be achieved. Transformation processes are prone to conflicts, be it competition over large resources, be it the creation of new jobs, and the decline of established ones, like the brown to green job transfers, be the large geopolitical questions that pervade bilateral hydrogen relations. So, what does hydrogen governance actually imply? How can hydrogen expansion be governed in a sustainable way? What forms of democratic participation can ensure that people can actively decide on hydrogen futures? These are all things that come to my mind, and I'm very excited to keep this conversation going. I'll just quickly introduce our panelists. I'm very happy that we have Michèle Knodt from Technische Universität Darmstadt on our panel. Michèle Knodt is professor for comparative political science and EU studies, and her research engages with external energy relations, energy governance, and most recently with German and European hydrogen relations. There's two recent pieces I can recommend. Focusing on the impact of the Russian war against Ukraine on the German hydrogen discourse, which just appeared a few weeks ago in Sustainability, and also a piece on external hydrogen relations of the European Union, framing processes in the public discourse towards and within partner countries. You don't have to write that down. I have created a special pad for this session, which I just will say something about in a minute. Further on, we have Marie Dejonghe from Ghent University on our panel. Hello, Marie. Great you're joining us. Marie is a PhD researcher at the Ghent Institute for International and European Studies, and she examines the security of supply implications of large-scale imports on zero-carbon fuels. And she also has recently written about hydrogen partnerships established by Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium, wondering what democratic and governance qualities these partnerships are containing. Then we have Quentin Blommaert joining us from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, where it is already later in the evening. Quentin Blommaert is head of the Hydrogen Diplomacy Office in Riyadh and is involved with the H2 Diplo initiative. Previously, he was involved with German Trade and Invest and with the external trade chambers as an expert on sustainable finance. And last but not least, we have Benjamin Schütze joining us from Freiburg. Benjamin is head of the DFG-funded Emmy Noether Junior Research Group, Renewable Energies, Renewed Authoritarianisms. And his research focus are politics of intervention in the Middle East, Western forms of democracy promotion, regional expertise on Jordania, and also focus on authoritarian entanglements, which is something that we also see involving in energy or even in hydrogen corporations. So as the Zoom chat can sometimes get a little messy, and also as I would like to encourage as much interaction and exchange among our participants as possible, as it is possible in this virtual format, I have created a pad, and I would just like to encourage everyone to use that. I'm just typing it down into the chat. And in this chat, in the pad, you can type in questions to our participants, but you can also type in any kind of hydrogen event coming up in the year. Also any kind of publications you find interesting and you would love to share, or any kind of networks that you find interesting in the hydrogen sector. I have already done a little bit of work, and for instance, there is the Women in Hydrogen network, which I find especially exciting because the energy scene is so much male dominated and we definitely need to change this. And I've also pitched in a list of publications I found quite interesting, and I would like to encourage you all to let this pad grow by and large so that we get a larger collection of any kind of content related to hydrogen governance and democracy. So please make active use of it. Yeah, so first of all, I'd just like to introduce all our panelists with a quick introduction statement. And I was just wondering, as we already had some debate on hydrogen and democracy in the panel before, which challenges for hydrogen cooperation do we face in relation to the gas crisis, to rapid decarbonization needs and/or energy and hydrogen geopolitics? And how does this translate both to the desire for energy democracy and to the hydrogen expansion? So this is still a very broad opening, and maybe you would love to connect that a little bit to your work and to the research that you're actually doing. And yeah, maybe Michèle, would you like to start, please?
Yes, thanks a lot for the invitation, Franziska. Happy to work together with you again. Well, I think we have several factors and we heard about them and you just raised them again in your question. That we have speeded up green hydrogen ramp up. So we have climate neutrality, we have the war against Ukraine, the gas crisis, and that means we will quickly decarbonize, and that means just if you look at Germany, that we will double our need, our demand for electricity. And we will maybe cover 70% of it by imports. And that means that we need energy carriers, which allows us to store renewables long and to transport them. And hydrogen is one of the most known energy carriers for this endeavor. But we have also metals, iron, aluminum, to transport renewables from broader away to Europe or to Germany. So when we look at that, we need these partnerships, which you in your introductional note have called hydrogen bilateralism. So we need partnerships between Europe, between Germany, and then we have to look who this might be. And if you look at the scientific literature and policy consultancies and whatever, for criteria, how to choose with whom to team up, we can see the first suggestion is get what you can, like a rush, like with the LNG. The second is get the cheapest you can. Well, that might lead us not where we should be. And then there are coming criteria like diversify, and the country has to be predictable, stable, and reliable. Very few authors in the literature really address democratic and justice norms. And that is what we tried in our project. The project is called Clean Circles on Energy Storage in Iron instead of hydrogen. But for the democracy part, it doesn't matter what energy carrier it is. I will say one word later to iron. But we try to come up with an evaluation of partner countries which incorporates more than costs and so on. So we look, beside costs, we look at sustainability, security of supply considerations, and most important governance criteria. And we introduced those as objectives and constraints. So we converted the selection problem into a multi-criteria optimization problem. Multi-criteria, not one criteria optimization. And so we are able to calculate all these criteria and the objectives and come up with different suggestions which countries would suit and which maybe not. And let me say one word about iron as an energy carrier, because when introducing hydrogen today, you didn't say some of the, or didn't mention some of the disadvantages which in the transport, which is that hydrogen has a very low energy densities compared to, for instance, iron. And that means it's very hard to transport huge quantities. You have a huge volume and a little bit of energy. While in iron, for instance, you have the same quantity, but a lot of energy. And it doesn't get really better if you liquefy it or if you convert it to ammonia. And that is difficult when we look now, maybe in a second round of discussion, where we would import to Europe, where we would import hydrogen or iron from. It means renewables from. Just an example, if you load two ships from Australia to Europe, one with hydrogen, one with iron, and you let them drive and say, okay, you use that load also for your drive, for your transport. So the hydrogen ship will stop at the Panama Channel. because it's empty. If you have ammonia, it comes to Europe, but there's not a lot of left over. And the ship with the iron pellets goes to Europe and only has used 4% of its load. So there you can see there is a difference. And especially when we come up with countries far away, we have a problem with hydrogen. And you export the water, which you don't do with iron. But coming back to the question, I would say, yes, you can have democracy requirements and hydrogen expansion that goes together. And maybe in the next round, I can say a little bit more on what we use as constraints when it comes to governance.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for that overarching view and for that close-up also on your research. I'll be excited to learn more what governance criteria you have in mind and how they are all placed. I liked how you put the whole trouble with the myriad of hydrogen partnerships as a kind of optimization problem. And in that fashion, I would be really curious how Quentin Blommaert with a diplomacy perspective would relate to that. How is diplomacy involved into that kind of optimization problem? Or maybe you would frame it in a completely different way. How does diplomacy alter the picture? What kind of job are you doing in that regard to work on the hydrogen partnerships?
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can properly hear me. Thank you, Professor Müller. I'm extremely happy to be part of this panel. I'm happy to see known faces. Marie, goedenavond. Benny, hello, and Professor Knodt, it's a pleasure to be with you on the panel. And I greet my colleague Vandre Speelmeijer, who provided already a couple of insights regarding our work. And I will try to build upon what Vandre provided us with, because I'm one of those 8 countries where the German Foreign Office decided to open a hydrogen diplomacy office. There's one within that global hydrogen diplomacy initiative coined and started by the German Foreign Office in 2021. I started myself activities here in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia on the 1st of February 2022. And just for the story behind it, this Germany started in 2019 already to engage into an energy dialogue with Saudi Arabia. And that dialogue was cemented within a memorandum of understanding in March 2021. There's the BMWK, the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action in Germany, was then in a dialogue with the Ministry of Energy in Saudi. And that initiative was being implemented by Guardhouse and supported by the German Chamber when it comes to the Saudi Arabian context. They would focus more on the entrepreneurial and the business to business, government to business, and vice versa, business to government part of it. I base my work on their work. And in that respect, in Saudi Arabia, we have 2 initiatives when it comes to energy concepts, energy dialogue in Saudi Arabia. And the idea of the German Foreign Office behind the global hydrogen diplomacy, as mentioned by, there's somebody typing in the background very quickly. I'm sorry. The idea behind it is to add a new layer of analysis behind the just technicality and the costs that are incumbent to the technicality when it comes to hydrogen as a future internationally traded commodity. As you referred to, Professor Müller, at the beginning, this hydrogen will indeed reshape the energy landscape as we know it today. It's a fact. It will disrupt, distort a little bit existing balances within the energy landscape and within domestic energy systems. All energy systems are de facto, but also de jure different because of topography, geography, and so on. And within my particular work in Saudi Arabia, I base myself on the technicality and the costs incumbent to technicality provided by the first initiative from the BMWK. And I add the following layers of analysis, namely all the long-term questions linked to hydrogen's impact on the future energy landscape. Energies of the future, which industries will be expanded in Saudi Arabia when it comes to the energy transformation and the future hydrogen economy. So which one will be expanded? It's mainly petrochemicals and mining that are both of strong relevance for the 2 named sectors, and which new industries will be added. And in parallel to that, first question is, of course, the labor market. And this was addressed by Innocent. It was addressed also, I think, by Nuria, by Fandre as well. It is not enough, so to say, to come up with new technologies, new ideas. That's the material capital. There is a human capital that runs continuously next to it. And we try to focus on this within the study context to always match, so to say, those new technologies that will be added within the energy system first, but also within existing industries when hydrogen is also being used at a domestic level. That's the inward-looking perspective of my work, and the outward-looking perspective is, of course, linked to the international energy trade. And I come back to your statement, Professor Müller, at the beginning, this we will reshape, but we don't know to what extent, in what quantities. We don't know how many million tons will eventually be exported from key producer countries to key importer countries, and in which form. But as a matter of fact, for instance, Germany, Netherlands, and Belgium will be future importers, and as they are at the time being addressing future key exporter countries like Saudi Arabia, that has a lot of intrinsic assets it wants to develop in the future. And to link it to the diplomatic part of it, diplomacy is a long-term task. And in that respect, we prepare the soil, so to say, we prepare the ground throughout platforms, through dialogue platforms, and try to bring all the different stakeholders involved within the ongoing energy transformation in Saudi Arabia with their peers from Germany, but also external members, to kind of create a fruitful soil for reflection when it comes to challenges, when it comes to opportunities that might arise with German support from a technology, from a knowledge part, to provide in the future the precious molecules for export on the one hand, but also, as you rightly mentioned, Professor Müller, also to use them domestically also here in Saudi Arabia. The framework, as Fandre highlighted, within the prolongation of our project as the hydrogen diplomacy, is decarbonization of course, the industry, and along it, of course, of society in general, because at the end, we are the users of the energy and of all the products that are being provided on a daily, weekly basis. Just to sum up my role here on the diplomatic parquet, so to say, we match the dots between those stakeholders at the highest level, but also at a lower level, and try to bring always those different stakeholders that would not always meet, but I do understand the meaning of breaking the gaps between all those silos. And as hydrogen does it within the energy landscape to link electricity, heat, and transportation, we try to be that linking element between the different stakeholders to kind of realize the sector coupling we've been hoping for in the last decades. And I will stop here for my introductory comment.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a real passionate explanation of how hydrogen diplomacy works, and how the matchmaking is done among many different stakeholders, and how then the role of the H2 diplo officers comes in making that happen. So of course it's interesting to see within which surroundings hydrogen partnerships are established, and for that I'm handing over to Benjamin Schütze, because I mean you are an expert on the rise of authoritarian tendencies also in the energy sector, and this is of course something that we have to keep in mind, for instance, when we look at cooperations between Germany and Egypt, with Egypt becoming a new player in the renewable energy sector, quite close, much closer than many African nations like Namibia or South Africa. And I was just wondering whether you could frame your opening statement also with regard to how corporations are going, and how that tension between democratic cooperation and authoritarian corporations is navigated, and what kind of tendencies you see evolving here.
Yep, thank you very much. Can you hear me? All perfect. Thanks a lot, first of all, to you, Franziska, and the other organizers for having put together this really great event. So just before I start, as you said, in my research, I look at the political economy of solar energy or renewables at large in the Middle East and North Africa. So I think it would be absurd to discuss questions of renewables and sustainability in the region during ongoing acts of plausible genocide, as the ICJ put it, without explicitly speaking out against this. So let me just at the beginning express my solidarity with Palestine. So to get to your question, advocates of energy democracy, of course, argue that the materiality of renewables, including their distributed nature and the potential for new ownership structures, offers a window of opportunity for the contestation of authoritarian power. So before going into more depth on this in regard to green hydrogen, we should quickly recall what role hydrogen can technically play in efforts at energy transition. So at the macro level, the energy transition is about moving to an energy system based on renewables-based electricity. It is important to remember then that electricity must be the backbone of any carbon-free energy system. And as a clean energy carrier, green hydrogen, the production of which is very energy intensive, should only play a role where electrification is impossible. Nelke in the previous panel also emphasized this point very importantly. So if we look at the current share of renewables in electricity production in the MENA, Middle East and North Africa, it should be quite obvious then that before any energy intensive green hydrogen is produced for export, the renewable energy plants in the region should be used to directly decarbonize the electricity mix of the local economies, actually. So we need to ask ourselves what the intended and unintended effects of the current hype around green hydrogen are. In my opinion, this hype not only obfuscates where much more significant advances in terms of decarbonization can and should be made, but also serves as a means to maintain existing political and economic structures. While decentralized solar power can, for instance, be community-owned, green hydrogen facilities require major financial investments and enable transnational corporate actors to basically maintain their position in the energy sector. So the kind of mega solar and wind parks that are needed for large-scale green hydrogen production would also likely reproduce the kind of land and water conflicts that we have already seen, for instance, in Ouarzazate in Morocco or elsewhere in the region and beyond. Also, the employment effects of such mega plants are in most cases only minimal. Now, the fossil fuel industry, especially gas grid operators, see hydrogen as a means to basically continue doing what they are already doing anyway. So gas pipelines can, for instance, be repurposed also for the hydrogen transport, and the production of blue hydrogen also already now often goes hand in hand with enhanced oil recovery projects. So this means that while claiming supposed green benefits, fossil fuel companies produce hydrogen predominantly from natural gas and use the obtained carbon dioxide to increase the pressure in oil fields to further expand oil production. Both in terms of decarbonization and energy democracy, it would then, in my opinion, be much more advisable to actually primarily focus on electrification, on greater renewable energy-based electricity production for domestic use, and for the expansion of transnational electricity grid interconnectors to further improve the integration of renewables. The effects of a potential future hydrogen economy on the prospects for democratic change in the Middle East, for instance, ultimately, but also elsewhere, depend on the context within which hydrogen projects are implemented. The future development of electricity prices and their relative importance vis-à-vis the price of the resources to be processed is key in this regard. So the question here is whether we primarily will see the production of green hydrogen for export, or whether we're rather going to see a relocation of energy-intensive industries to the region itself. The first would, of course, perpetuate deeply problematic extractivist dynamics, and the latter could, however, be a potential entry point for the establishment of more green industry in the region with significant employment effects, and it could thereby also lead to stronger labor unions and to more pressure for participation and socioeconomic justice. So now this is basically some of my thoughts on the relation between hydrogen governance or hydrogen expansion and ideals of energy democracy. Perhaps I'll leave it at this for now. So basically my key point is that hydrogen does have certain inherent material characteristics. However, they do not in and of themselves have any kind of agency. So the possible establishment of a green hydrogen economy may then in theory present a window of opportunity to challenge authoritarian practices. But based on what we're seeing, I'm somewhat more skeptical as to whether that will really manifest. Perhaps I'll leave it at that now, and I can later on, when all of us have had a chance to say something at the beginning, I can get into more depth about specific examples of authoritarian practices, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, and also thank you very much for referring to typical conditions that should be should be fulfilled when creating partnerships, like focusing on combating energy poverty, looking at electrification, and I think most important, connecting hydrogen projects to the local energy policies and the renewable energy transition frameworks that so many countries in the global south have in fact put in place, a fact which is very often underscored. These are already good points when we're wondering what standards for good hydrogen governance should be. And for now I'm handing over to Marie Dejonghe. I mean, much of your work has already focused on the hydrogen partnerships and how they can be assessed. So I'm excited to see how your work relates to that and what tensions you see currently evolving in the design of hydrogen partnerships, and also what kind of political response you would be looking for.
Thank you, Franziska, for the invitation and for organizing this very interesting conference. I think I will build on a bit what Ben said, that I think indeed there is this window of opportunity for hydrogen, and it's also very much used among industrial players and big companies in putting this forward. And this also kind of gives me a bit of hope that we're also starting from scratch. There is no trade yet. It's mostly still locally produced and consumed. So the whole market still needs to be established. So this gives the opportunity to at least think, and I think also think more strategically on how we are going to do this, both on the side of the importer, but also on the side of the exporter, of course. So, but the bad news is, I think, that there are a lot of challenges. And for me, one of the challenges that is still missing a lot in the discourse is also the risk of carbon lock-in, because hydrogen in itself, it does not contain any CO2, of course. But the whole industry around it, I think Ben already briefly touched upon, is fossil fuels and is very energy intensive. I'm not only talking about blue hydrogen, but there's also CCS. There is this project then in Belgium, in Fluxys, which are repurposing pipelines or putting up a pipeline network to transport carbon dioxide and put it into, I don't know, the North Sea, something like that. So it's completely connected to this fossil fuel industry. And I think that is something that if you're governing this market, and I think hydrogen is also brought into life, or should be brought into life because of the decarbonization of hard-to-abate industries. I think for that is one big challenge that should be included in when setting up the market. Another one for me is also establishing equal partnerships, and do not go over to these extractive relations, creating enclave economies. There should be a lot of attention going to creating added value in local communities, also having civil society involved in decision making. These are all things that up until now are still very much missing and in the background. And as it's mostly industrial players and big government boardrooms where these decisions are made, we really risk into reproducing existing inequalities. So I think for that, hydrogen, it has an opportunity for these economies to leapfrog, also the industrialization, green industrialization. It has the opportunity. This gives me hope, but also I want to be very wary about how this market is set up. And then finally, I think Europe, but also other countries, we have to think more strategically. After Russia invaded Ukraine and with everything going on in the world, geoeconomic competition, I think we are really, from a European point of view, then risking of changing one dependency to another, if it's to some countries in the Middle East or in Africa or wherever. They have to think about what are the risks, what are the risks we are willing to accept to take, and also to think about the trade-offs and just do not go, like Michèle said, for the cheapest option of just take what you can get, but at least think about and do not publish strategies where there's actually nothing inside. So I think I will just stop here, and then I will address other points in the questions.
Okay, thank you. That's a strong point on how not to do strategies. I'm seeing your hand. Just let me focus on that for a second. So it's important to see also the problem that we are replicating a kind of technology first, politics second expansion, and this is something that worries me, especially as a political scientist. And this is something where I think a more sound focus on hydrogen governance would in fact be needed. And we will delve deeper into that point in a second. Just one point before, as I would like to have an interactive panel here. I'm receiving different messages whether the pad I've set up is working or not, and some people say they cannot access it, but on the other hand, I've seen that the content in it has already been changing and several people have already pasted anything in. So if anybody wants to pose a question and the pad is not working for them, please just copy paste something in the chat. I'm also looking at the chat and I'm able to multitask and see the things that you would like to intend to say. Quentin, Blommaert, I'm seeing you, please.
If I might, I'd like to directly react to Benjamin and to Marie. The hope, like through renewables, to democratize, so to say, energy access was, I think, what we all had on our radar when it all started. As Germany coined the term Energiewende back in the days, beginning of the 80s, and spread all around the world. Now we might struggle a bit with concepts. I'm a philologist myself by training. I love wording. Just now we speak about energy transformation because some countries, especially in developing countries, have problems understanding why Energiewende, because we don't have anything so far, so we don't have to switch. We have first to grow, so to say. But as a matter of fact, it doesn't change anything from the technicality. The technicality is PV is cheap. And when we have it in certain remote areas, we can provide people with energy access. Boom, we provide batteries that have chemical storage for a couple of hours during nighttime. That's a beautiful concept. But parallel to it, whatever geography we are in, we have another concept is the one of speed, because we are all concerned about all the negative effects climate change has been triggering in the last decades. However, we parameterize things, whatever metrics we take, speed is always the one above them. And I say speed because, and it's a kind of contradiction, Benjamin, and I confess that I don't have a solution for it, but by expanding the size of project, I simply reduce LCOEs, because I can reduce LCOEs, I can reduce LCOH. And when I can do this, I can create, so to say, suitable conditions for investors, for companies to believe in projects. And I come to Marie, in an area where I don't have a market, locally produced, locally used. We want to use that gaseous harbinger called hydrogen as a future internationally traded commodity, but I need to link the dots. there are a lot of contradictions in the manner how we will be or we have been using those technologies. But for me, like speed is a key within all the different projects, all different dialogues we have been continuously having in the last in the last decades. And from a cost perspective, like from an economical perspective, big projects are simply mechanically cheaper. It's a fact. But what might happen, and I come to you again, Benjamin, in the future, as of now, in the Middle East, does not have a lot of installed capacities of RE, whatever PV, wind, or geothermal, also or tidal in the future. This will change, so to say. We will have a lot of those masses of green electrons. We can't store, we can't transmit per interconnectors, but we might transform into hydrogen in the future, and this could be dealt with at a more local level. That's for certain. It's already something we are thinking of, especially in more developed countries when it comes to grid integration. Take a look at Europe from an electrical point of view, from a gaseous point of view. We are all interconnected. It's beautiful. And it allows us much more technical solutions than here in way larger areas with harsher conditions. But it might happen. As of now, Saudi Arabia intends to have 130 gigawatt of installed capacities by 2030. They don't need a big part of those green electrons. Bam, we might switch and provide them to third people, especially neighboring countries. Again, electrons-wise, but also in terms of hydrogen or derivatives. I don't have a solution for that contradiction you addressed, Benjamin, but I have to look at the economic elements. Like without cheap PV, I cannot provide a lot of African, but a lot of sub-Asian, South Asian countries with cheap electricity. They definitely need. You see, that's always a kind of a tricky balancing act between those big projects with maybe potential big monopolies. But at the same time, I need them to reduce costs to provide more people with that precious electricity/energy access. And I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you very much for looking at the trade problematic and how these what kind of gaps we find, how we deal with subsidies, and how we deal with the question with the economies of scale. And that's close to the point that Michèle has raised in the first place, saying that typical criteria for partnerships are cheap, quick, and diversified production. Yeah, you have already come up with some ideas for good hydrogen governance, and to me that would be one of the key points to deliver to create partnerships that are driven by a sense of good hydrogen governance. So what would that imply? What's needed to ensure that?
Yeah, so we came up with that multi-criteria optimization model, and that means we start from costs as usual, looking at costs of production, transportation, and also emissions coming with CO2 prices if we still have normal ships and so on. So we put that all together, though these are our costs. And then we add constraints, as I said, and we had sustainability as a first constraint. And we put in data for economic, but also for social and environmental dimension of sustainability. So using indices like International Trade Union Confederation's Global Rights Index or Environmental Sustainability Performance Index, and these kind of things for the sustainability side, and also looking at data telling us something about not to harm the energy supply of the local population of the exporting countries. So we measure this requirement in terms of the population share with access to electricity, use data of the World Bank. And then we added a second constraint, which is the quality of governance, because we think if we have an environment with a better quality in governance, we can have another kind of discussion about where to put the site and under what conditions and so on and so on. So we use the World Bank's worldwide governance indicators. We came up with the 6 dimensions. We looked at voice and accountability, so perceptions of the extent to which a country's citizens are able to participate in selecting their government, freedom of expression, freedom of association, free media, and so on. first dimension. Second dimension, stability, political stability, and the absence of violence. So likelihood of political instability, politically motivated violence, including terrorism. Also with one eye on risks. And third dimension, government effectiveness. So what is the quality of public services, civil service, independence from political pressure, quality of policy formulation, implementation, credibility of government's commitments. Then regulatory quality, so looking at the ability of the government to formulate and implement sound policies and regulations that permit and promote, but also regulate private sector development. Then the rule of law as one very important one. What is the quality of contract enforcement, property rights, and so on. And the control of corruption with all the indices you can imagine. And we built an index over 10 years average, and we didn't weight these dimensions. We just put the 10 years average of this dimension. And then we add a structural constraint for the security of supply, simply saying then that we limit the share of imports for each supplier. And we said we need a minimal number of suppliers to avoid that repercussion of individual outage. So, and then we put that into the model. And I also put that in your page, Franziska. We have a dashboard, so everybody can use that. It's open. And you can, for the constraints, the costs not, you cannot change the costs, but you, and not the structural energy or security of supply, but you can change the thresholds of the sustainability and the governance. You can have a high quality of governance, high quality of sustainability, and you can lower it, and you can see which countries are in and out. So what the model would suggest, what countries would be good or not. So if you put a really high, a relatively high threshold for both of these constraints, actually there are not a lot of countries in. So we came up with Canada, US, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Spain as the only European country which would have enough renewables, because this is in the model too. Can they produce renewables? In theory, at least. And Southern Africa and Australia. So most of them Western industrialized countries or emerging powers. And and we also calculated the costs, because the higher the threshold, the higher the costs. It's not so cheap because you have to import it to Europe. And if you have a high quality of governance and a high quality of sustainability, that comes with higher prices. If you look then with which countries Germany really has, because we did it at the example of Germany, and we did it with iron, as I said before, but you can easily adapt that to hydrogen. Just little indicators with transport, therefore I explained that in the beginning, and the water question. But more or less, it will be the same. And so we can see, I mean, Germany has partnership with Australia, South Africa, Brazil, and Canada talking about hydrogen, with Mexico not talking about green hydrogen yet, United States not talking about green hydrogen at all, Argentina not talking about energy at all. Spain is out because it's in the EU, so we don't need a cooperation also. It's not a partner in that idea, it's a European country. So yes, that would be our outcomes, and anybody can have a look at that dashboard and play a bit around with the thresholds.
Okay, great. I'm really excited to have a look at that and see where we end then, and what kind of partnerships seem the most democratic and sustainable ones. But still, I mean, there are important debates in political science saying, on the one hand, we need to cooperate also with authoritarian regimes, especially in a world driven more and more by energy security and by energy or hydrogen geopolitics, if only to tame them, and if only to be part of a political dialogue and not have some pariahs somewhere in the world who can't be controlled any longer. And this has always been the fallback option argument for saying, okay, of course, one needs to cooperate. Cooperation is the essence of any kind of dialogue. And also other debates focusing on normative powers say when you have a long-standing political dialogue, it may mean that, for instance, democratic norms will have a kind of contagious effect, and other nations will adopt them as well. And also we've seen that in the United Nations systems, even authoritarian regimes adhere to the democratic rules and play by these rules and don't act as they would do in domestic terms. So the picture, of course, gets a bit more messy, as a moral-driven statement might imply. So I would maybe shift the debate a little bit to these points, and maybe first to you, Marie. I'm sure that you've seen several forms of hydrogen geopolitics or hydrogen security currently evolving. How should politics deal with that, and what kind of tensions do you see at the moment?
So yeah, firstly, I think indeed that hydrogen is not free of geopolitics. I think we all know that the whole energy transition is really reshaping energy relations. There will be new players coming in, future net importers such as Morocco or Namibia will probably export electricity in the form of their renewables in the form of electricity or molecules. So you really see these changing relations. But on top of that, you see also that the concept of hydrogen security is also changing. When it was in 2020, when the European Union, for example, announced its hydrogen strategy, it was a lot on climate and on how to decarbonize industries. It was part of the European Green Deal. But then only a few years later, when Russia invaded Ukraine, hydrogen got also this energy security dimension, where it suddenly also was a tool to diversify away from Russian gas, where it was also a tool of decreased gas consumption. And it got from this very important role as getting to net zero and the Paris Agreement and the Green Deal towards energy security, and the role how it played in the energy transition and in also in geopolitical relations with Russia. And now I think the last couple of months even, you see again hydrogen security getting a whole new interpretation in a way that is becoming more and more important in industrial policy. And I think there will be a panel on that also tomorrow, where hydrogen is becoming a key instrument in keeping economic competitiveness, in industrial competitiveness, especially also in light of changing geoeconomic dimensions. So you really see that it's not only changing bilateral relations and dependencies and power relations, but it's also becoming a tool in, I mean, they say it's a Swiss knife in how you can use it, but it's also very much used in terms of politics and how to do economic statecraft or energy statecraft. So I think it's also very interesting to see that going on as well.
Okay, thank you so much. I'd again like to hand over to you, Quentin Blommaert. How does hydrogen diplomacy come into the picture? What are the magics of hydrogen diplomacy in that regard? How can diplomacy contribute to normative change also in the sphere of global energy and hydrogen relations? And also, could civil society be activated also in the ways that you are practicing hydrogen diplomacy?
Yeah. Again, we are present in different countries, and the peculiarities of those different geographies are central. Thus, from Latin America to Africa to the Middle East and Central Asia, those are 4 different regions of the world, and those intrinsic peculiarities they present will provide us with different actors, stakeholders. When it comes to my context, to the Saudi Arabian context, throughout those diplomatic spheres, we can also show them the long-termist approach we also intend to play and we intend to construct with them. Marie mentioned this equal partnerships, and I will add equal and long-term partnerships where I don't see the other as a pure like off-taker of my products, but where we try also to create more circular relationships through which the other stakeholders have a part in the future value creation chains that were also mentioned by Fandre and Innocent. Marie mentioned as well, we have a little bit the old guard of the energy system, of the energy landscape, but we have newcomers. They also have expectations within the upcoming hydrogen economy. And key there is to accept those changing realities. We all have vested interests, but again, from a European, from a German perspective, I cannot compete with the LCOEs they have here in the region. Because when it comes to the production of certain assets, steel, cement, etc., where the energy costs are a big part of it, in the future, we will have some switch in terms of special goods and commodities to be produced in other areas. And it is very important for us to prepare, so to say, also those aspects with certain countries with whom we intend for the long term, again, to reevaluate the manner how we have been trading with each other. And diplomacy is, to my understanding, as a non-diplomat, again, I'm a philologist by training, but diplomacy has always been like that soil preparing long-term also trade, political, social, and cultural commitment. We've spoken about dialogues, but as to my knowledge, a lot of dialogues have been monologues, actually, where we don't ask the others. We are not empathic towards the others. We pretend to know. We don't even speak the language of the other country. We are stepping foot into where is the dialogue? A dialogue on a P2P basis is full of empathy, where we are listening to the expectations of the others. Again, I refer always to Innocent and Fandre when it comes to the creation of value added in those countries with whom we intend to generate certain new commodities. What would they like to have within those future value chains to elevate, so to say, their own industrial infrastructures, their own industrial tissue? And the same is valid also for Saudi Arabia, that has to switch. They want to become also a clean tech hub for the world, and they will accept support from any other countries, from Europe, from North America, or from Asia. But for this, it is more than the pure technicality, more than the costs income to technicality. There's also like soft skills all around it. And those more like diplomatic, linguistic, cultural skills are also tremendously important to better perceive the others as he or she is with the existing intrinsic assets, natural asset, again, cultural asset, industrial assets. We are speaking of this old guard and new guard. When it comes to the, let's say, old guard, Saudi Arabia, like the Gulf region, has been drilling for and exporting hydrocarbons, molecules to the world. They will use it for transportation purposes, for heating purposes, for pharmaceutical purposes. That's the issue with the exported molecules. In the future, it might be indeed steel, cement, etc. But this has to be, so to say, bilaterally, multilaterally prepared among future importers and exporters of hydrogen derivatives or the other goods produced by those molecules. And I will stop here.
Yeah, thank you for that take. I'm again handing over to Benjamin, because I guess with your background also in post-colonial studies, I'm sure that you have some idea on how Eurocentrism is also pervading energy dialogues or monologues, and what forms of listening would maybe rather be needed. But then on the other side, how does that fit to the to authoritarian tendencies in the energy sector that we can clearly identify, and how could that be overcome? Do renewables hold the power to create a sense of energy democracy? Is there still a kind of democratizing quality, and what needs to be done to bring that to the fore again?
Thanks a lot for the questions.
I know it's a long question. Sorry about that.
No, it's all of them very valuable and important questions. To begin with, perhaps I'm very critical of any kind of energy determinism. So I don't think energy sources in and of themselves act in any way. They have different energy sources, have different materialities that we need to pay attention to, and that certainly are crucial. But then ultimately it's about human agency and contextual factors that decide how this materiality plays out. I do think, as mentioned earlier, that renewables have, given that they are decentralized in contrast to fossils, oil, coal, gas, is like to be found at one specific spot and can in that way easily be pushed into concentrated forms of power, and thereby has a certain tendency to enable or push authoritarian practices. I'm saying tendency, not an inherent quality. So renewables being decentralized, of course, have this like potential to also rather encourage decentralized, more participatory, more inclusive power structures. But then again, human agency matters. So what we're seeing in the Middle East and North Africa, which is the region that I'm primarily focusing on, is that this decentralized or decentral characteristic of renewables is being pressured into highly concentrated forms of power, economic and political power. So the expansion of renewables in the region primarily occurs via the privatization of renewables. And in most cases, this leaves no tangible benefits for broader publics, not in terms of employment opportunities, not in terms of lower electricity prices. And on top of this, local communities are often not consulted when mega projects are implemented. They become expropriated in the name of sustainability, and they see public money used to guarantee private profits. So Quentin said that big projects are cheaper. But I would just like to emphasize the point that we need to also think about the kind of energy system that we want to build. Do we want to see the privatization of renewables and energy, so profits flowing to private hands? Or do we want to envisage and to realize an energy system in which energy and renewables are seen as a common good? So to get back to hydrogen, economic efficiency speaks against hydrogen and rather for renewable electricity at the moment, at least, yeah. But then even when talking about renewable electricity production, we need to ask ourselves whether we want to merely replace energy sources, so from fossils to renewables, or whether we want to push for ideals of energy democracy. And if we want the latter, we must change the way renewables are being implemented. And we cannot only go for mega projects. On top of this, the question should be cheap for whom? You said mega projects are cheap, but for whom? If we look at Ouarzazate solar power plant, which probably is known by most of you in Morocco, the contracts were drawn up in such a way that Aqua Power, the Saudi company, actually has such advantageous conditions guaranteed to itself from the Moroccan side that the Moroccan public basically accumulates 80 million, I think it was euros, per year in terms of debt. So actually the Moroccan state loses money via this mega plant. So cheap for whom? Again, so the ability of states in the global south to proactively pursue common goods approaches in the energy sector and elsewhere progressively decreases as renewables are being privatized. And basically a key underlying point in all of my arguments here is that I do see authoritarian power not just as defined by repression, absence of democratic institutions and processes and so on, but also as encompassing socioeconomic forms of authoritarianism. And so if we want to push for ideals of energy democracy, we need to basically change this dominant approach to expanding renewables. And to just very briefly sum up again, so we need to change the way it is being financed. We need to change the way the projects are being implemented. We need to pursue common goods approaches. And we also need to think not just the energy sector, but we need to see the broader picture. So if we look at EU MENA bilateral relations, it is somewhat shocking to see that like the two pillars in these agreements between the EU and Tunisia, or EU, Morocco, and so on, the two pillars are basically cooperation in terms of energy politics and cooperation in the fight against migration. And this is telling. So it's basically a reminder of the deeply hierarchical manner in which the EU desires to control and manage trans-Mediterranean connectivity. We want to have goods and energy flowing freely from one country to the other, while humans from the region are to be contained violently. And another example for the authoritarian ways for the authoritarian dynamics that renewable energy projects at times reinforce is, of course, if we look at the way how the Moroccan occupation of Western Sahara is like also being legitimized via the promotion of renewables. And we can see the same in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, where Israel is also implementing wind farms. There's a wonderful article on that by Dejonghe, Muna Dejonghe. So in both cases, we certainly don't see a peace dividend playing out, but we rather see the reconfiguration of authoritarian practices behind a facade of sustainability. But I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. There's a reaction by Quentin. Yes, please.
Benny, cooperatives. Cooperatives have been existing for centuries. I love them. We have the cooperatives for mills, like in the past, because not everyone could afford a mill. But we have also a forno, that's an oven in Italy or in Spain. And Germany is worldly famous for energy cooperatives. It's a model that goes exactly in your direction. And I would speak always for complementarity. Again, I will not change the mathematics. I will not change the law of physics because they will be valid any place. But I will simply try to have aligned models next to each other. I need ramp up of technologies to decrease costs. I need it. Otherwise, I cannot let people in certain areas with less financial means access needed technologies. I need a ramp up for this. I can't change it. This is simply like mathematical laws. But next to it, to kind of go into your direction as well, and based on the German model, based on Spain, Portugal, Italy, on all those beautiful cooperatives, we can expand those models because they make sense. I said in my previous statement, as renewables as that possibility to democratize energy access, and through the cooperatives, exactly what you do, and you have it at the lowest potential level. We have hundreds of examples in France, in Germany, where people were strongly against windmill, strongly against. But as soon as you had a clever enough mayor to go and talk and get into an empathic dialogue, it was not only about numbers, it was about understanding the fears and accordingly the reasons why people would be against. We work on those fears, we alleviate, mitigate those kind of fear/risks, and then we speak of what it might bring the community. That kind of dialogue can be led, according to my knowledge, as soon as we speak the language of the people in any place. And that's a model I suppose we can build upon within larger geographies. But again, I need a complementarity, as to my knowledge, of different platforms. I will need the bigger platforms to reduce costs, because by reducing costs, I can spread a word as I can spread a technology. And to cement it at the lowest level, we can use other existing models. And it's only one I take for granted. There might be a lot of very meaningful models elsewhere in the world. Thank you.
Yeah, Michèle, please.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said. Just a word on the decentralization. I mean, we tried that hardly, and I'm even at the board of one of these energy cooperatives. Yes, but not only to a certain extent. You know, I mean, we had large papers on our communities, and we can do it up to 40-45%. We can cover, and then that's it. You know, and so. Also in Germany, especially in Germany, where you don't have wind and sun all the time, it has a limit. And we are talking about, at the moment, we use like 680 terawatt hours a year of electricity. And that will double to 1,200 terawatt. This you cannot do by decentralization. You need a kind of higher one. And when Ben was saying we have to use the hydrogen coming in for the things which we cannot directly electrify. Yes, but we also need a solution for the gap which we are becoming because of volatile wind and sun. And there is a gap, and this gap we have somehow to fill. And that means the demand will be still high. And therefore, we are working also on iron, because with the iron, you can retrofit actually the coal plants we have. And to burn iron pellets, more powder than pellets. And you can have CO2-free running of the former coal-fired power plants in order to get that, that volatility, the caps to be filled, which cannot be filled by the renewables. But that means we need that demand, be it hydrogen or iron, it's the same, But what I'm asking Ben and Quentin is, actually there's a scarcity. And actually for the countries, it's a good position to bargain. Actually, they don't have to sell it, so it's so cheap, because everybody needs it and nobody knows where to get it from at the moment. So isn't that a good moment to bargain? And we, from our side, should also press to have the governance, the good governance measurements, also not only selecting countries. I mean, I just talked about selecting countries, but if you put the threshold down, then you come to Morocco, Algeria, whatever country, and then using the same criteria and trying to build up joint ownership, trying to put this requirements from our side also, to push our governments to put that on our side too. But aren't you in a good position? Actually, you don't have to sell it cheap.
Okay, Benjamin.
Thanks a lot for the comments. I think very valuable and important points again. I fully agree that, of course, we cannot only use decentralized. Doesn't work. We need mega plants. Totally with you. But like the question is, how do we manage? How are these managed? Who owns them? Who builds them? And where do the profits go? And in the Middle East and North Africa, the dominance of these mega plants is just massive. Like in Morocco, you don't see a lot of rooftop solar panels. It's simply and so there, in such a situation, I would say that external support should be much more geared towards boosting community-owned solar power production. And instead of boosting mega projects like some of you have probably heard of the X-Links project, which is just crazy. I mean, they envisage to produce in Morocco to add, I think it's exactly the same amount of electricity production that is present in the whole of Morocco. They want to establish it in one spot in terms of huge solar and wind power plants again, but not actually connected to the Moroccan grid and purely connected to the British grid via the longest subsea cable ever built. Highly skeptical as to whether that will actually happen. And so such projects, I think, are just crazy, and that is not the right way. So going back to your point, you say we need a solution for the gap. But for me, that gets back to Franziska's mentioning earlier about post-colonial approaches, perhaps. For me, that is, again, the center. It is us. It is us needing, wanting to solve our energy problem, and we externalized the energy transition to them. But it was us who caused the global climate crisis. So I don't think we should just now externalize all of that, but we should also, instead of talking just about green hydrogen and all that, the danger is, what do we not talk about anymore? We don't talk anymore about reducing our own energy intensive consumption patterns, and we don't actually talk about like big changes needed at home, like here. We talk about mega plants that have to be built elsewhere so that we can make our economy more sustainable. And there also the point that was mentioned by Marie earlier about carbon lock-in is very important. So basically, also I'll leave it at that for now, but thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't without intention that earlier in the conversation I used the term post-industrial world, because this is especially the point. I mean, of course, it sounds a bit utopian, but the question is, of course, to what extent do we need to green our steel industry? To what extent are steel industries created in other parts of the world, and how much of that greening can be done over here, and what might have to be externalized? I mean, Bremen is going a different way. For instance, the city of Bremen has their own steelworks, and they are trying to green it by offshore wind farms in the North Sea. But of course, this is not always possible. And of course, Germany, being, well, of course, not really a landlocked country, but one with a much shorter coastline than Britain, is much more on the forefront of externalization than other countries like the UK or France. And I mean, this also brings me to the question of what could be done to come to an hydrogen multilateralism and avoid more and more tensions towards hydrogen bilateralism, which is something that worries me as an internationalist. But I'm talking too much, and there was another reaction by Quentin, please.
In numbers that struck me in the past, the highest concentration of installed PV per square, let's say, meter kilometers in the world are not in the sunniest region of the world, which is funny, right? It's in Flanders, that's Marie, Proficiat. It's in Japan, and it's going to be in Bavaria. And the key elements we know it's going to change, of course, because of extremely low LCOEs we have reached so far. This is going to drastically increase in many regions, but key are a policy framework enabling it. You need a strong policy framework in order for what you ask for in Morocco, Algeria, rooftop. You need a framework for this because the individual wants to know what happens with the green electrons because they're going to put money on the table. What happens to me as a family, as a household, as an individual? Because it's a question of policy framework, and it happened in Flanders, in Japan, among others, in Bavaria, because of money. They had money also to put on the table, and the combination was simply very good. But you see in the Middle East, Benjamin, and it's extremely important. A lot of projects in CNI, this commercial and industry areas are happening, and as you see this, that the project will diminish in size because those industrial plants, they don't need 100 megawatts. They're just happy with 40 or 50 megawatt power installed capacity. It is being reduced up to a certain point. You see that the scales we had in the past can and will be diminished according to the needs of all the different actors. This not only the steel plant, but also the smaller manufacturers, but also households. Coming back to a remark you just made, Professor Müller, and what Nelk also said, we have to embed hydrogen derivatives or whatever into existing systems, and I can't change those technical fundamentals. I can't change them. They are there, and for the sake of costs, again, refurbishing, revamping, upgrading an existing infrastructure costs me less money. And this is extremely central, especially for those with less financial means at their disposal. It is also valid for us within European countries. As I simply use my assets more efficiently and I maximize what is already granted, just in terms of material assets. Does the existing system to make a future better use of it. Best example is pipelines. By refurbishing existing pipelines for hydrogen pipelines cost me a third of the price, according to academia. I would take it, for instance, just to diminish costs and be able to drag all the costs to more meaningful ideas or projects. And I stop here.
Yeah, it's interesting that you take us to Bavaria and Flanders, because we in fact have several examples of hydrogen localism where completely different applications can be found, because in those smaller clusters they make total sense. Also, there's a kind of cluster involving at the Baltic Sea, involving some communities in Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Germany, and that's interesting. What is possible then when it's not done on the large scale. But I think I'll first hand over to Marie, because she hasn't she hadn't had the opportunity to say something before, and then I'll hand over to you, Ben, if that's okay.
I just wanted to react also to Quentin that what the thing is about technology, that it's also not neutral. That I think it's very important to see that what is happening here, that it's not because the hydrogen is there and it's because of if it's chemical, like of course it has the physical capacities, but it's used for people, for their interests, for companies, and they're conflicting as we see, especially Europe. They want to decarbonize, but also I think for African countries or countries in the global south, it's really for them also a way to also use the solar panels and to develop and also create their own industries. Because, for example, why would they, a country such as Namibia, like export hydrogen or ammonia when they can also make fertilizer and also like save by that food security issues? The ammonia prices, fertilizer prices were extremely high because of the Russian invasion in Ukraine with the extreme high gas prices. So it's not neutral, and we are making choices, and we are also governing this transition, and we should be aware that we are not talking about just easy techno fixes and technologies, but we are really talking about setting up a market where we are also having effects on people and on local communities, but also especially also on decarbonizing the economy, and it really has to go hand in hand. So that's something I wanted to add as well.
Yeah, thanks also for reminding us of the fertilizer troubles, which is an often forgotten conflict, which we will have much troubles with in the future, I guess. Ben.
A year and a half ago, I met the German ambassador in Rabat in Morocco and asked him about German-Moroccan energy politics and ideals of energy democracy. And he just plain out said that like they see energy and democracy, or issues of energy and democratization, as separate. He just plain out said that as such, which I think is deeply problematic. And Quentin, you said that we cannot change existing systems, and that we must embed renewables into existing systems. Yes, I agree, but we also, as I said earlier, we must decide what kind of energy system we want in the future. And so are we fine, for instance, with building, financing and building renewable energy mega plants in Moroccan-occupied Western Sahara and receiving electricity from there? I mean, Morocco is already connected to the European grid. Are we fine with that? Is that something that we want? How we see our renewable energy transition as happening, or would we want to actually have some kind of different future energy system that is more inclusive, more participatory, more egalitarian, and so on? And in that regard, I would just like to challenge you a bit there. Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
please.
No, I mean, if I might, it's about resource efficiency, energy efficiency. It's all my point. I mean, because again, that has a price. The more I have to build, as you rightly said, the more I have to build, the more I have to drill, I have to care for. And this has a cost. It has a capital, it has a human, it has a material cost. The better I use resources by being efficient in the manner how I use past, present, and future resources, the better it is to me for communities. Because resource efficiency is key, central. That's why I said there is a kind of existing system to which we have to embed, to take on Nelke's word, to which I have to embed upcoming technologies, and thus we adapt. We have been adapting the system because the system was not ready for renewables in such masses. And for me, it's really about resource and energy efficiencies because it reduces my costs on different aspects, as human capital, resource capital, money capital in general. That's more my point.
Just very quickly, cheap for whom again? Cheap for whom? Cheap for the economic actors implementing the plant may not be cheap for the society as a whole. And that's the only...
It is cheap for society if from a systems perspective you reduce costs because we all pay for it. We all pay at Netzentgelte. We all pay, this society pays for certain costs within the energy bills. That's a fact. and they will increase in the future because the grids within Germany and Europe, they will need to be refurbished, but I can kind of keep them at a certain level by better simply using resources, resource efficiency key.
But then I'm just saying that the expansion of renewables via privatization is not cheap for the whole of society because it incurs a ton of hidden costs that actually are not what we want. It shouldn't be what we want to have in our future energy system.
Yes, I agree, but I would look at it as two pairs of shoes, so to say. The hospitals will need also, the schools, the kitas, the elderly houses will need electricity, will need heat in the future. It is, it was, it is, and it will be a fact. And they will also need clean energy. And for this, the system itself at the lowest costs, because society will have to pay for those increased costs in general, but we can kind of reduce them by being as efficient as feasible with the existing, plus then the upcoming resources that will need to be added. You got my point. For me, those are two different shoes. And I understand regarding those mega projects, it's always tricky who is behind it. But that would be another pair of shoes from my perspective.
Yeah, I'm not completely sure whether we're going to untie all these different pairs of shoes today, but it's good that we have this lively conversation and can have a bit of a well, not heated debate, but a passionate debate, but still be respectful. And so that's exactly what I wanted for this evening. But as we're now coming to an end, I would like to give everyone the chance to have some final words, stating what would be your one wish for green hydrogen futures. So, Michèle, would you like to start? You look like you already have a kind of vision.
Yes, I mean, I would say no hydrogen, take iron, you don't have to build pipelines. But that's only the other, you don't have to invest in pipelines because you don't need that infrastructure. But I mean, I'm totally also on Ben's side when we said actually the hydrogen we don't need is the best hydrogen, you know. But I must say the last year also working in this kind of climate initiatives and whatever I'm really frustrated because whenever you put burden on people's shoulders that they have to change and they have to change their behavior, we get an extreme shift to the right. So that is really what is worrying me. And I'm not very convinced that we can really reduce the energy consumption as I expected it already a year ago, because we could reduce like 20% in that difficult times, but that's it, I think. So I'm not very optimistic at the moment in the future, but I'm completely on your side that we have to think of who is getting the money. But if you have an idea how we can get our politicians like the ambassador to go to Klimaaußenpolitik or climate diplomacy in that way, I'm very happy.
Okay, good wishes here. Marie, what would be your wish for green hydrogen futures?
First of all, but I'm also then speaking a bit for myself, I think that it's so important that this is also discussed as a political issue, and this is not only an issue of just easily decarbonizing industries in the global north to make sure that we're just compliant with the Paris Agreement and that's okay, then we're all set. So I think this is good that also I'm also funded by the federal government of Belgium, that they are putting money into this, not only for myself and for my job and for my income, but mostly that they are thinking about, okay, this is not an industrial thing. We have to think about how we are going to implement it, how we are going to make this market work. So for that, my hope is that they keep us also at the table, especially also to raise these questions that are often overlooked by economists because it has to be cheap or whatever, because I think it's so important to just do not, I mean, we've had already a lot of extractivist industries, and I don't hope that hydrogen can become one of them. So they need us, I think, at the table. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And what would be a wish for hydrogen futures out of a diplomacy perspective?
It's more like I think a personal wish, and I would link what a little bit the three other colleagues, and thank you for being with all of you tonight. The most rational use of those precious molecules, should it be at a domestic level, go for it. Should it be transformed, go for it. That's the most rational use, because those molecules have cost a lot of energy, money, and resources to be created, so to say. And that's why go for the most rational choice when it comes to its actual usage.
Okay, yeah, and how about your vision, Ben?
First of all, also thanks a lot. I really enjoyed this discussion. So instead of pushing for green hydrogen abroad, I would argue that we should, at least for now, or my vision would be that we would focus for now much more on changing our own consumption patterns, realizing that this is very challenging and difficult. One, this. Second, on enabling and promoting community-led renewable energy plants at home and abroad. And three, yes, enable mega plants, renewable energy mega plants, however, ensuring that the financing for these plans doesn't actually exacerbate already existing debt crises in the global south. So basically facilitate funding schemes that ensure that the profits from renewables actually flow to the public and not to a private sector.
Yeah, thank you again. Now we have made the full circle back to democracy. Yeah, I'm very, very happy that you all have found the time and energy to join us for today, and I'm really happy about this very lively conversation, and also for all the interactions that we had and how these different positions came together. This is much more than I had expected, because so often on Zoom it's a bit sterile, and now everyone was so engaged. That was really beautiful. So thank you very much for being with us, and I hope that we can continue these cooperations in the future, and I wish every one of you a really nice evening. But of course, this is not the end of this conference. We're continuing today with, no, not today. We're continuing tomorrow with two other brilliant panels. And so we're starting at 2. The first panel will focus on the decarbonization of industries with potentials and pitfalls of green industrial development. So a more industrial policy perspective chaired by Rainer Quitzow, and bringing together several panelists from the industrial world, and the research perspective by Laima Eike. And the last panel will then focus on green hydrogen and water justice, as the water issue is also such a pressing one in the hydrogen debate. And here we again will have a broad panel with people both from technology but also from the civil society, and again, a very international panel. I'm very excited how that's going to be like. And I wish you all a very nice evening. Thank you very much for staying with us so long on Zoom. And I hope that anybody here found much food for thought. And see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ciao.
Thank you. Goodbye.